Hey everybody, it's Eric from EPautos.com, your Libertarian car guy, and today's little rant is more of a calling your attention to something. I was sent a link about a documentary that has come out in Germany about diesels, and it talks about the recent bans that have been imposed on diesel-powered vehicles in a number of German cities, including Stuttgart, and then it gets into the basis for these bans, which are very specious basis for banning diesels, the supposed effect of their emissions. You've heard about that a lot on my site. You've heard a lot about that in the news. Well, they actually examined the data and tried to find out whether they could come up with something other than a statistical model, very much of a piece with the climate change thing. Some actual facts, in other words, to demonstrate actual harms caused to people by these cars. And they were not able to come up with anything. The emissions that are produced by these diesel engines are so minimal as to be irrelevant, which is something I have been writing about for some time, principally with regard to what happened to Volkswagen and its diesels here. But it's a really important issue because what's happening in Germany right now, that is the outright bans on vehicles that have diesel engines in a number of cities, is apt to happen over here as well because of inertia, because of the accepted premises, because people have been tricked and fooled into believing all this nonsense about these diesel vehicles being quote-unquote dirty, and they're not. It's a fiction. It's a fantasy. It is, most of all, a hyper-exaggerated, confected threat, very much of a piece with the climate change thing. There's this just generalized hysteria on the climate change front, that we're all in peril of imminent extinction if radical steps are not undertaken to impose energy austerity on the masses. Of course, never on the elites that are pushing for this stuff. They've got enough cushion financially and otherwise to protect themselves and maintain their standard of living. This is going to affect us, but that's not the point. The point is that it's a confected, manufactured crisis. It's not a real crisis. Dig into the data, please. Don't take my word for it. Look into it. You're talking about a measured approximate 1 degree increase in average temperatures, and even that is debatable based on where those temperature readings were taken. But nonetheless, that's the observed actual fact, not the hypothesized computer modeling. The actual fact, a 1 degree increase in average temperatures over roughly the past 100 years. And interestingly, the height of that occurred back in the 90s, and since the late 90s, the trend has been back toward cooling, which is why they had to abandon the whole global warming thing and come up with this climate change thing to replace it. It's a really shady, dodgy, unscientific piece of rhetorical manipulation. It's not something that can be pinned down and defined. The climate changes. Okay, it gets warmer, it gets cooler. Science is about definitions. It's about being precise. And that term, climate change, is anything but. Well, similarly, they have hyper-exaggerated the amount of emissions that have been produced by late-model diesel vehicles, which is slim to none, but they exaggerate them on purpose and make it seem as though these things are just filthy, planet-despoiling atrocities, little miniature Exxon Valdezes spewing soot all over the place. Well, just think about it. The last time you were behind a late-model diesel-powered car, did you see anything? Did you see any soot coming out of the tailpipe? Could you smell anything? And the answer is no, because there's not only nothing visible coming out of the tailpipe, there's hardly anything invisible coming out of the tailpipes of these cars. The emission standards have been incredibly tight for more than 20 years. That goes for diesels too. They've just tightened them up to such an extreme degree that they are able to characterize literally fractional differences from year to year as huge, and it's grotesquely misleading. They'll characterize, let's say, a 1/4% difference, as a 25% difference in emissions, and it's technically true, but it's a percent of a percent in which they don't qualify. It's like those little asterisks that you see on car ads where they tell you to come on down and buy the new V8 four-wheel drive, whatever it is, for $28,000. You see the little asterisk, and then it says, you know, must buy from vehicle in stock, and then blah, blah, blah. And of course, that vehicle isn't in stock, and yada, yada, yada. And the actual cost to you is about $40,000. Well, it's a very similar and very equally shady kind of manipulation of facts. And I think that the reason for it all has to do with the fact that these diesels were getting to be so good, they were nearly pollution-free in any meaningful sense, and they were tremendously practical. Some of them had a range on a full tank of close to 800 miles, and I'm talking about cars like the Volkswagen Jetta, for example. And Volkswagen was working on diesel-powered commuter cars that were going to be capable of getting 80, 100 miles per gallon, by the way. And that's, of course, all been kiboshed because of this. And literally, in Europe, hundreds of thousands of perfectly good cars are being thrown away because they've been rendered useless by these fatwas prohibiting people from driving them. If you can imagine that, you know, you spent $25,000 on a car, and then 2 or 3 years after you buy the thing, the government says, well, you can't drive it anymore. Not here anyway. So not only is it useless to you, it's impossible to sell the thing for anything less than pennies on the dollar because it's useless to other people too. And I don't want to be alarmist, but that same kind of thing is going to happen in this country. I'm convinced of it. Some people used to laugh at me when I would talk about the threat of cars coming from the factory with governors on them, smart governors, electronic governors that not only limited top speed, but prevented the vehicle from being driven faster than any speed limit. Well, they're doing that in Europe, and that technology is coming here also. So be hip, be warned, be advised. This is not paranoia, unfortunately. I wish it were. I'd gladly go to a rubber room and take my meds. I wish I were crazy, but I'm not, unfortunately. Go out there and do your own research and check it out if you doubt what I'm saying. And there's also more up on site, EPautos.com, which I like to think of as the internet's best libertarian gearhead site. And I think that's probably because I'm the only libertarian gearhead, as far as I can tell, who's regularly writing about cars, transportation, and their effect on our freedom. So thanks for listening, and hope you'll come by the site, and we'll catch up with you again soon.